Okay, can we have a representative from group number 1? Who's group number? Is this group number 1? You want to pass? Okay, group number 2. Group number 2, presenter. You guys are 2? Okay. What?
I'm just here to pause.
Test. Test 1, 2, 3. All right. So, is everybody ready? All right. So the questions we had is, in a nutshell, why natural disaster? Why human wickedness? Why would God allow human wickedness? And why would He allow people to starve or get cancer? So you can read the questions up there. Why natural disaster? God is, we discussed that God is all powerful, and sometimes, all right, sorry. So we discussed that God is all powerful, and sometimes He wants to nudge the unbelievers so that they can, to remind them that they can depart at any time. Sometimes he wants to remind us and non-believers that we can depart at any time, and so He wants to nudge us in the right direction. Also, after the fall, the natural law got corrupted. So creation fell as a whole. God created the earth perfect, but after the fall, everything got corrupted. And in Romans 8, by paraphrasing, for we know, for the creation groans to become like what it was in the beginning, but obviously it's corrupt now. And C.S. Lewis, we talked about how C.S. Lewis described how God talks to us, and God whispers to us in our pleasures, He speaks to us in our conscience, and He shouts to us in our pains. It is His megaphone to speak to a deaf world. So sometimes when we're too stubborn to listen, that's His megaphone that He uses. And why does He allow wickedness? We also, obviously, the subject of freedom came up. He gives us the freedom to love Him, to hate Him, and He created the fact of freedom. We created the act of freedom. God, here's a few cool little, God made evil possible. We made evil actual. So obviously, He gives us, these are all fancy ways of saying God gave us free will. And as a consequence, these things happen. Wickedness comes along. But He makes He makes us strong in these times. Everything always works for the greater good. So why starve or cancer? The story of the blind man came up, and Job, and he, in a nutshell, He has a plan and purpose for us, and that is to become Christ-like. And if this is what we have to go through, then so be it. And Saint Paul also asked that God may take away the thorn, but the answer he got from Christ was, "My grace is sufficient, and my strength is made perfect in weakness." So,
Thank you.
That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Group 1.
Oh, I'm on the stage.
For everybody watching us online, please send your emails or texts in within the next minute.
I'm so glad Rami spoke first because it pretty much mentioned a lot of the points that we brought up. And the first one, the whole natural disasters, the idea for to help us kind of refocus on what is our purpose on this in this world. So if we just kind of help us to remind us why we are here, and the time is limited, this is only temporary. You mentioned something about like this is megaphone, so we had this is way of God talking to us in like in a tangible way. Abuna said something funny, and he said it's good for equilibrium of life, so yeah, it's nice. Yeah, and some of the other things that we talked about is that we shouldn't be starting our belief in God by evaluating him on the disasters, but we should experience him first. That we have to have this knowledge of God, that he is a good God. So we need to try to get to know him. And in addition, why do we only remember God only for his bad things and forget him when good things happen? Like, yes, tragic things do happen and maybe 39 people will die, but God sustains over like all the people in the world who live every day. So why aren't we thankful for that? Okay, the other one with the number 2, why does he allow human wickedness and the whole free will? Yes, the same thing that we have. So to add just something different is, so one of the points to kind of counteract the whole free will thing is that sometimes is that, like for example, a person who has the direct intention of harming someone else and God intervenes, is that taking from somebody's free will? So then we talked about the concept that God is a sovereign God. And what is sovereign? What does that mean? It means that, he is self-governed. He makes his own decision, and we can't really understand or say, why God did you decide this? He's a sovereign God. He makes his own decisions, his own kind of, at that moment, he decides. The other thing that we wanted to kind of distinguish was God's will and God's foreknowledge. Like God's will was not to have wickedness, be infiltrated among his daughters and sons and daughters. This was kind of based on our action and our own free will to do that. So he does have like foreknowledge of certain things, but that doesn't mean like he wills evil for people. And he he interferes. So yeah, like the whole cancer. And I want to say something about people who do have cancer. I work in a cancer center, and it's a lot of actually maybe a lot of the outsiders might see it's a terrible thing, and a lot of people are miserable who have, and they're suffering. But trust me, people handle cancer a lot better than you guys think, and they're very strong, and their faith becomes stronger. And maybe this was something that they needed, to get closer to God, or their faith becomes stronger. So we don't really understand, like there are certain things that we don't understand, but we do understand that God, all things work together for good for those who love him. So no matter what it is, whether it's, good or bad, it all works for good. That's it.
Great job. Thank you very much.
Can I just add a verse that we found that would be
Yes, come on.
perfect to tie it all up? It says, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of his law." So like, we might not know everything, because we live in a wise generation where everyone wants to know like why, but there's some things in life that you just don't know, and you just have to like seek God and just hope for the best and like have faith that it's just gonna turn out well or good. Oh, and when we go to heaven, it'll reveal everything. Oh, Deuteronomy 31. 29. Oh, 29. My bad, sorry.
Thank you very much. Great verse. Group number 3.
Hi guys. So starting off, is suffering ever exclusively bad or wrong? And Jimmy actually challenged us with some scenarios, put yourself in a scenario where you may be ill, or you're in a traumatic scenario, you lost your legs in an accident or something. And we came to the conclusion that whether or not suffering is ever bad or wrong would really depend on the person and their relationship with God. If they fall into prayer, it actually brings you closer to God. If you really look at it, as you pray and pray, it'll bring you closer to God. So it'll be kind of, at first you might see it as such a terrible thing that happened to you, but as you pray, you might find the reasons as to, how to turn the event around. And through that actually leads us to how is pain or suffering redemptive? So if you're looking at it and you're praying about whatever happened to you, you might find comfort in what's going on through your prayer. And we actually found a verse that says from 2 Corinthians 1 verse 4, who comforts us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. So not only could we be comforted through our prayer and whatever tribulation we may fall into, we may comfort others by the way that we're looking at it ourselves. If we accept what happened to us, others can actually look at it and turn around from it as well. And then how has Christ transformed the meaning of suffering? We actually looked at one very obvious thing, which was Christ's crucifixion. Christ suffered to bring us salvation, to save us. And in the same way, when we suffer and we're at our lowest, we're down in the pit, Christ will actually reach down and pull us out and help us out. So that's actually the very obvious way of how Christ would turn suffering around. And that answers all three of it for us.
Thank you very much. Group 4.
No pressure. Okay, we had the same questions as group 3. Is suffering exclusively bad or wrong? How is pain and suffering redemptive? And how has Christ transformed the meaning of suffering? Pretty much, I guess this could sum up the first question. How is it exclusively bad or wrong? We don't believe there is no positivity without the negative. Funny, Sandra and I kind of clicked on the same quote from a great movie, A Walk to Remember. There is no compassion without suffering, and we totally believe that's true. How can you know the love of Christ if you haven't suffered, if you haven't really what? Okay. I guess you can know God. It's not goes without saying that you can't know God and be when you're happy, but to be honest and be realistic, most of us are, we get closer when we're upset, when we're suffering, when we need Him most, when we need that crutch, and that's what we kind of focused on. And then Sandra had a really good, a good visual. She had example she'd like to share with you guys.
All right, so it's kind of a personal story, but I was just talking about how I recently moved back home, which is Dallas for me, and I don't know how many of you know about Dallas, but it's kind of the dry land for spirituality. Anyways, I hope I don't get killed for this. But I know the whole world is watching on camera, but it's okay, I'll confess about it later. So what I was telling all my friends that were calling me up, and they were telling me, how's Dallas? And I was like, it's like a roller coaster, there's mountains and valleys, and it's a valley, like it stinks. And 2 weeks ago, I know, really, I should have filtered this. And then 2 weeks ago, I went to California, and they're having a drought in California, and so there's no rain, obviously, and all the mountains are dry, and so all the mountains are yellow. And I noticed something that was very interesting to me is that all the valleys were green. So that's, so the mountaintops are all yellow, the valleys are all green, and I had a realization that that's absolutely right. Like the valleys, our low points, are when all the fruit happen. That's when God comes to us and we're down on our face. It's kind of answering question number 2, like how is it redemptive? When we're flat on our faces and, we are down in the pit and we have nowhere else to go and we're suffering and we're struggling, that's when we come to God, like flat on our face. And that's when all the fruit happens and we grow our trees. So really, like the top of the mountain is always dry for us because that's when we're successful and we're positive and we don't need him and we're like, all right, so everything is great, see you later. And then when we're down there, it's like, all right, okay, I need you again. So after I realized that, when people called me up, I was like, yeah, I can't really say mountains and valleys anymore. Like, it's all good. So that was just kind of my little story to share. And then how has Christ transformed the meaning of suffering? And they already tapped on it, which is obviously he suffered. And then we were kind of discussing, well, how do you say that to a non-believer because they don't believe in Christ anyways, so what does that mean? And we were talking about, well, let's make it practical, like bring it to their level. So whatever it is that they're suffering or they're going through, like school, work, whatever, they had to suffer and there was agony and there was pain that they went through in order to get the success at the end, like in order to get their A or to become the top of their class or to get promoted or what have you. And it was worth it. And when in that moment of victory, they didn't remember the suffering and like all the bad things that they went through to get there. Like all the toil was well worth it in the end just to get that victory. And so that's kind of like what Christ did for us. Like he suffered and he resurrected, like he came up. So whatever hard things we go through, like we're going to resurrect out of that and we're going to come out on top. Oh, yeah. Okay, so one more story. Sorry. Abuna's lecture was titled earlier, the Bursting the Cocoon. And I was telling Abuna, I read once in a story, and some of you may have already heard this, that a man was walking in the woods and he found a butterfly. Well, it was in its cocoon, so it wasn't a butterfly yet. And it was struggling to get out of the cocoon. And he felt really bad for it. So he broke open the cocoon to get the butterfly out, and the butterfly came out and it couldn't fly. And he was very upset with that, so he went home and he did a little bit of research. And he found out that actually the butterfly has to struggle. It has to struggle through the cocoon in order to strengthen its wings. And that's why when it comes out, it's capable of flying. And so that just kind of reminds me, like, in regards to the church and evangelizing, I'm running out of breath. Okay, in regards to the church and evangelizing, like that's what the church is right now. It's struggling, but if there's enough struggle and enough toil, eventually we'll have enough strength in our wings to fly. But also for ourselves spiritually, whatever suffering you're going through, just know that it's the struggle for your cocoon so you can break open and fly.
Excellent answers. I have nothing else to add. Everything came out very nice. So that concludes our session. Thank you very much, everybody.